Juan Andres Batista, known to many as Andy, was the personification of the Filipino dream. A brilliant legal mind, polished within the prestigious ivory halls of Harvard Law School, he returned to his homeland as a beacon of institutional integrity. He was the golden child of the Philippine legal system, serving as a respected dean and eventually rising to the very pinnacle of civil service. In 2015, he was appointed as the chairman of the Commission on Elections, the powerful body known as COMELEC. This was not merely a career appointment. It was a sacred trust that placed the future of a nation in his hands. He was the man solely responsible for overseeing the 2016 general elections, a pivotal moment in history. As the world watched, Batista stood at the center of a volatile political landscape, wearing a mask of unwavering composure. When he was the guardian of the ballot box, ensuring that the transition of power remained stable. To the public, he was the face of a modern, transparent democracy, a servant who lived far above the fray of traditional politics. However, behind the closed doors of his private life, the foundation of this pristine image was beginning to crack. The domestic fracture began not with a political rival, but with his wife, Patricia Paz Bautista. What started as a personal rift escalated into a national crisis when Patricia stumbled upon a hidden cache of wealth that defied logic. In the quiet corners of their shared life, she found records suggesting her husband was leading a complex double life. This was not just a minor discrepancy, it was an entire shadow empire. In a move that shocked the entire archipelago, Patricia went public, delivering a bombshell revelation that would forever tarnish Andy's legacy. She revealed nearly 1 billion pesos in unexplained wealth, an astronomical sum for a public official. Most damning were the 35 passbooks from a single small thrift bank, accounts that had never been declared. This was the physical evidence of a secret life, a mountain of paper that whispered of illicit dealings, offshore transfers, and hidden agendas. The allegations were specific and devastating. It was claimed that these sums were the result of commissions funneled through law firms and technology companies involved in the national voting infrastructure. Specifically, the shadow of corruption fell upon the relationship between the Election Commission and Smartmatic, the tech giant responsible for the electronic voting systems. Before we continue, you should subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The narrative built by the whistleblowing wife suggested that the technology used to secure the democratic process had been a vehicle for personal enrichment. The Philippine Congress, sensing a scandal of unprecedented proportions, initiated impeachment proceedings to strip Bautista of his immunity. The man who had been the architect of the nation's electoral process was now facing the gavel of his own peers in the legislative branch. The pressure was suffocating, and the walls were closing in fast. The tension reached a breaking point as the legislative body prepared for a trial that would have dissected every bank account and offshore transfer. Yet before the final judgment could be rendered, Andy Bautista chose a different path. In a move that blended fear with strategic calculation, he suddenly submitted his resignation, claiming pressing medical concerns that required specialized treatment abroad. He boarded a flight to the United States. He left behind a country in turmoil and a legal system now weaponized against him. The departure was seen as a calculated escape, a flight from justice under the thin guise of health. In a matter of weeks, The man hailed as a national hero and guardian of the law had transformed into an international fugitive. He traded the corridors of power in Manila for the quiet suburbs of America, hoping that the vast distance would provide sanctuary. But as the sun set, the question remained whether the American soil would truly offer him refuge, or if it was the first step toward a prison cell far from home. The golden child had fallen, on leaving behind a shadow filled with unanswered questions. Once the wheels of the plane touched down on American soil, the suffocating heat of the Manila scandal seemed to dissipate into the crisp air of a perceived new beginning. Andy Bautista sought the profound anonymity that only a vast foreign landscape could provide. In the United States, he was no longer the powerful chairman of a national commission. He was merely another face in the crowd, a quiet resident, blending into the suburban tapestry of American life. He traded police sirens for mundane daily rhythms, curating a persona of a retired academic living in peace. However, this peace was a fragile illusion. Back in the Philippines, the government was not content to let its most high-profile fugitive slip away. Diplomatic cables hummed with the tension of extradition treaties as Manila pushed for his return to face the music of his impeachment. Yet, the legal gears of international extradition moved slowly, and for a time it seemed the Pacific Ocean would serve as an impenetrable barrier against the reach of Philippine justice. But while the diplomatic front remained bogged down in bureaucracy, a more formidable force was quietly assembling a case that transcended national borders. The investigation shifted focus to the heart of the American financial system. Federal agents began to notice a glowing trail of wealth that led directly to Florida. With its sprawling estates, hidden inlets, and complex banking networks, the Sunshine State became the focal point of a forensic accounting miracle. The money that Patricia had first revealed in Manila began to materialize in the ledgers of American banks. And this was no longer just a domestic dispute. It was a matter of federal interest for the U.S. Department of Justice. Investigators followed a digital breadcrumb trail, linking high-level decisions in the 2016 Philippine elections to specific financial transactions in Florida. The connection was undeniable. The trail didn't just show wealth, it showed the mechanics of a global bribery scheme that utilized American infrastructure to move illicit gains through shell companies. The breakthrough came when federal prosecutors uncovered a conspiracy involving Smartmatic, the technology firm that provided the backbone for the Philippine voting system. The allegations were chilling. U.S. authorities identified a specific bribery scheme where Philippine election officials were allegedly compensated for ensuring lucrative contracts. At the center stood Bautista. The DOJ alleged millions in bribes were funneled through Florida accounts, masked by misleading labels. This money was being used to fund a lifestyle that stood in stark contrast to the modest salary of a civil servant. Properties were purchased, and accounts were padded, while the integrity of a nation's democratic process was allegedly being sold. The John Doe nature of the investigation gave way to a concrete indictment. Using cooperating witnesses, the U.S. government began to dismantle his defense of political persecution. These witnesses provided internal communications and complex spreadsheets that turned circumstantial evidence into a crushing narrative of international greed. The irony was thick for the man who had once been a law school dean. Bautista, who had taught legal ethics, was now the subject of a federal criminal complaint. The DOJ officially charged him with conspiracy to commit money laundering and bribery, transforming his status from a political exile into a federal target. As the legal walls closed in, the struggle of a brilliant mind facing the consequences of its own corruption became his daily reality. The American dream was rapidly turning into a federal nightmare. The culmination of this pursuit arrived not in a courtroom, but at the front door of his Florida residence. The early morning light was just touching the palm trees when a heavy knock echoed through the house. It signaled the definitive end of his life in exile. Outside stood the U.S. Marshals, seasoned agents who represented the physical embodiment of the law's reach. This was where academic theories met the cold reality of handcuffs. And the high-stakes legal battle was no longer a classroom exercise. It was a desperate fight for his freedom on American soil. The arrest in the early Florida light was more than just a police action. It was a symbolic stripping of the prestige he had spent a lifetime cultivating. As the U.S. Marshals led him away, the contrast with his former life in Manila was jarring. There, he was a man of the state, surrounded by the hushed whispers of assistance and the grandeur of the Commission on Elections. In Florida, he was just another name on a warrant, a suspect whose Harvard degree and legal accolades offered no protection against the cold iron of federal law. The humid air felt heavy, like the weight of the secrets he had carried across the Pacific. Like this moment marked the definitive transition from a life of perceived untouchability to the harsh reality of the American judicial system. The legal battle that followed became a masterclass in high-stakes litigation. Batista's defense team leaned heavily on the narrative of political victimhood, claiming that the charges were a weaponized extension of a vendetta fueled by his estranged wife, Patricia. They spoke of a man fleeing a corrupt system to seek fairness in the West. However, the U.S. Department of Justice countered this with a forensic surgical strike. They didn't focus on the politics. They focused on the paper. They presented a digital trail of breadcrumbs, millions of dollars moving through bank accounts in the Sunshine State, tied directly to the voting technology company Smartmatic. Each of the technical details of the transactions were laid bare, revealing how the very software meant to ensure fairness had been allegedly used as a pretext for personal profit. This was not a story of political persecution, but a story of money laundering on a global scale. The emotional toll on the Batista family was immense. What began as a domestic dispute had metastasized into an international scandal that tore apart the fabric of their lives. Patricia's initial whistleblowing, which once seemed like a private act of defiance, had effectively dismantled the legacy of the man she once shared a life with. For Andy, the weight of this betrayal, coupled with the crushing pressure of federal prosecution, created a profound sense of isolation. He sat in a foreign courtroom, a once revered academic and dean, just watching as his life's work was reduced to a series of incriminating spreadsheets and wire transfer records. The silence in the room was a stark contrast to the once vibrant halls of the university, where he had taught thousands of students the importance of the rule of law. The brilliance that had once characterized his rise was now being used by the government to prove the complexity of his alleged crimes. As the judge weighed the complexities of the extradition tug-of-war, the focus shifted to the lasting damage done to the Philippines. Regardless of whether he would face a Philippine jury or an American federal prison, the reality remained the same. The 2016 general elections, which should have been a testament to the nation's democratic maturity, were now seen through a lens of suspicion and graft. The resolution of this long saga sent a chilling message to corrupt officials across the globe. The long arm of the law does not stop at the border, and the American financial system is no longer a playground for illicit wealth. The international community watched as the case set a precedent for how cross-border bribery would be handled in an increasingly interconnected financial world. In the final reflection, the story of Juan Andres Batista is one of wasted potential and the corrosive nature of power. Greed had managed to dismantle a mind that was once dedicated to the highest ideals of the law. The architect of democracy's shadow had finally been exposed to the light. The ultimate irony of his career remains a bitter pill for a nation. The man responsible for the integrity of the vote had lost his own, leaving the world to witness the fall of a man who was supposed to be the guardian of the people's voice.